Welcome to the first dual Facebook Live of the new season for Land of 10 here. I am Bobby Legess.
I'm Scott Doctorman. Welcome, everyone.
Yeah, as always, pepper us with your Iowa questions, recruiting, football, basketball, whatever. We'll go through with all of them. But, Scott, we had a Kirk Ferentz Iowa press conference kind of jointly to wrap up the 2017 season and to kind of preview a little bit things that will be coming for 2018. So as these questions kind of start popping in there before it goes, is there any direction you want to take this one?
You know, I think that everything was kind of separated. There's really no key OMG moment there. I mean, I guess, you take it the way chronologically, offensive line. James Daniels, who Kirk, he'll praise guys, but not really to that level very often. So I think I was taken a little bit aback by, Kirk calling him the best center prospect he's ever been around, whether that's with the Ravens and Browns many years ago or, now in here. And, of course, he's not going to say that about all offensive linemen because he had Jonathan Ogden, but nobody's in that neighborhood. But still, I thought that was intriguing, and then how they might juggle things around. He tried to diffuse any kind of left tackle, right tackle issue. It's really about only how they're paid at the next level that really matters.
Yeah, the James Daniels stuff stuck out for me too, and it was more so he thought he could step in at age 20 and be a starting guard in the NFL day one, which I think then means he would have him probably move over in year two, most likely at center somewhere else. But yeah, with the way Kirk Ferentz is kind of viewed in the NFL with his offensive line knowledge, history as a guru kind of guy with everything there, those kind of comments about James Daniels I think will only help his stock. And I think walking out of today, I think I have a hard time seeing how he drops out of round two. If Kirk's praising him that much to the media publicly, I probably have a feeling he's saying a whole lot more privately to NFL teams that somebody's going to snatch him up during round two. Even though center is a non-premium position, it's rare to see a guy go that high. And you'll probably see multiple guys because Billy Price, the Ohio State center, will end up maybe even in the first round. But I would bet James goes round two. Just walking out of today, just with everything I know with Kirk and the way he's viewed, I think that all but shirted up.
Yeah, I think at the very, very worst, it's probably high third round. I mean, he's going second night. Tremendous potential. Has fought through injuries here at Iowa. So I think that's really kind of, the reason why he was able to have his stock soar so much. I mean, he was a, 4 borderline 5-star recruit, chose Iowa over Ohio State and Alabama, partly because his brother was here, LaShawn Daniels, and, started a couple games as a true freshman. That rarely happens at Iowa. And then here we are, he's away we go. So he's going to probably be a second or possibly third round pick. But that leaves a gaping hole at center. I think, right now you probably go with, probably Keegan Render, the guard, sliding over. He played one game at center just because Kirk, I think outside of left tackle and right tackle possibly, center is that one position where he really wants some sort of security because they make a lot of the calls. So I could see him going with a center because their next guy in is Cole Banwart, who'll be a sophomore, and I'm not sure that they're ready for that.
Yeah, I think next year, your answer, whatever it is a stopgap center for probably 1 year because you have Banwart, like you were talking about, and Levi Dua. They've kind of looked at there a little bit, and I think one of those two guys will probably end up manning the position for multiple years, but I don't think they'll be at that point to be able to take it over full-time yet. And so, yeah, Keegan's probably the obvious choice right now. Who knows, in the spring they could try a few guys there and somebody else pops out, but I think your answer is more of a short-term solution there than long-term, and I think that interior line is as big, or if not a bigger issue for Iowa when you look at 2018 than linebackers. It's a conversation we have longer and later, but I think that's a really big issue for Iowa. Coming into this year, we got some of the questions popping in here, and James wants us to recruit him. Well, if you're going to work for Land of 10, we'll probably we can hook you up as a free internship. But if you want to go to Iowa, I got to send your tape to Kirk. But if you want that free internship and B Scott's a gopher, we can set that up really quick for you. And Jeff wants to know who is next recruiting wise. This is an interesting January period for Iowa because they have virtually everybody already signed and brought in. and sealed and delivered. And so your final, month of guys on the road and things like that, not going to be as hectic as in years past. Iowa, right now, before we get any more transfers, it's looking like maybe 3 more guys for this class. And so it's not a lot of bodies there. The one name to keep an eye on is Jaden McDonald. Is a linebacker from Georgia, was a Rutgers commit who didn't sign in the early signing period, which in the new landscape of college football means he's not really committed to them anywhere. And he decommitted after signing day. Iowa came in with an offer, I think on the 31st of December. It was late December, but there's a few programs that Iowa's having to deal with. The kid's got some visits set up. Kansas State, I believe, or Miss has one, and the visit to Iowa is set for, I believe, the weekend of the 26th. So that's the one I think real position it needs still left for this team as linebacker, and that's their top target for it. We'll see what it goes there. But recruiting really kicks off again this week on Thursday. It'll be interesting to see what Iowa does and who they go after and offer for some of those final spots, because they're almost until you get other transfers coming in, it's just straight, who do we think is the best athlete? Who do we think is the best player on the board is kind of what they can go after, which is a luxury position for them at this point.
Right, the haze in the barn, per se. And I tried to press Kirk a little bit on the Indianapolis guys who have not been officially announced.
Did not go well.
And I guess from the way it sounded to me is they're ready, they're here. It's just they're not going to announce them until they want to announce it themselves. And I guess we'll just have to wait.
It sounds like there's a reason they're waiting without being able to go too much into it, and it's not really at the control of anybody at Iowa, and they're just kind of saying okay and going along with the way things want to be done out of Indianapolis, but it's not anything for fans, I think, to be worried about in any way, shape, or form. It's just not going to be announced as soon as you guys want it to. Unfortunately, Joe wants to know, is Josh Jackson a first-rounder? I would bet it. If I had to bet it, I would. I think most of the mock drafts you see have him going anywhere from maybe like 15 to the end of the first round. There's some that I've seen he's not in there at all. But that's kind of what you're looking at as of today, because with the way the draft whole thing goes, you start off now, and it's a whole industry between now and, when you get the draft in, April or May or whenever it is. And there's so many things they have to go through. Teams are going to like Josh Jackson. He's tall, he's big, he's long, he's got the body everybody looks for. He moves very fluidly. There are some of the issues teams might have had with Desmond King with his size not being the ideal shape for a defensive back, are off the board here. Every time people threw at him this year, which was constantly, he made the right play. He was in the right spot. He has good fundamentals and techniques. He's a kid who works hard. I don't think he's going to fall down teams' boards the longer this goes. I don't know how much higher he can rise, but I think he'll end up when we get to the draft as a kid who's firmly entrenched somewhere in the first round. There's no star cornerback in this class, and they'll probably go a little bit later than usual, but I think he goes somewhere in the first round.
I've seen him as high as number 4 to the Browns. I think he's probably somewhere between 8 and 20.
Who had him 4? That's wild.
I can't remember who was, but it was something somebody pointed out the other day. Now, he's rated as number 1 or number 2 corner with Denzel Ward from Ohio State. Once the run of quarterbacks goes in the top 5, they're maybe 3 or 4 gone there. That's when everything straightens out and teams go on A, best player available, B, in how it matches their team need. So, you look at teams like Chicago and others. Chicago scouted him. Brian Pace was there.
At Wisconsin, freezing in the press box with the rest of us.
Right. Not nearly as cool as Ben Stripeball, thankfully. I wish he was there instead. I think he's a first rounder no matter what. It's just a matter of where and how he probably times in the underwear Olympics here in another month and a half.
Yeah, Scott brought up a good point there. Is the quarterbacks is kind of going to suppress the talent in this draft, because top 5 picks, you'll probably see 3 quarterbacks. You might even see 4, and it's going to throw guys down. And so that's where you might get Mika Fitzpatrick. A lot of people see him going 4 overall to Cleveland with that second pick they have.
Right.
But you're also going to see Bradley Chubb, the star defensive end in this class, fall down. And so you'll see guys kind of fall down a little bit. And then so that's going to push back a little bit all sorts of players. Like Roquan Smith, anybody who watched that Georgia game, that guy's a no doubt probably top 10 pick most years. He might fall to like 13 or 12 this year because of that. And so that's going to have a trickle-down effect with somebody with Josh Jackson, too. Now, the good thing for Josh is he plays what's viewed as a premium position in the NFL. You know, cornerback, left tackle, wide receiver, defensive end, quarterback. Those are the guys teams want to spend their first-round picks, and especially high first-round picks on. So it helps him that he's not like the guard out of Notre Dame where somebody's going to have to kind of go out of type and have to explain to their fan base why they drafted somebody in the top 10, even though Nelson's a great prospect. He's probably going to plug and play forever. With Josh, that's not the question. Wherever he goes, it's, cornerback's position of need, high value everywhere, and the kid looks like he can fit it. So that should help him, too, in the draft.
Yeah, NFL's 60 to 70% sub package, so you're looking at minimum corners on the field for that many plays. So I think he's got a real chance to be high. But, again, we'll see what he runs in Indianapolis. That'll impact it. If it's a 4.3-ish, then he's probably top 10. Yeah. But, the quarterbacks will push it down. But after that, you got premium picks, Saquon Barkley. Roquan Smith is probably in the same territory as Josh Jackson because linebacker is not as valued as corner. And then, Bradley Chubb, pass rusher, left tackle. Okay, Orlando Brown, maybe the one from Notre Dame, but they're not automatics.
Brown's from Oklahoma.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I'm the kid from Notre Dame, McClinchy.
Yeah.
Brown went to Oklahoma. But so, anyway, that's probably enough draft talk for today, although I can get into it.
Yeah, we could both go for a while. Kelly says, thanks for what we do. Well, thanks for coming along and taking a part. And Kelly wants to know if there's a big/fast wide receiver in the mix for the next signing period, a Lazard type.
I can think of one, but you're going to have to see if he can get a transfer from a different sport. Ahmad Wagner. I'm not going to start any rumors or anything, but if Kirk and Fran can do a, trade Ahmad for a player to be named later, then there's your Lazard.
I think they both take it.
Yeah.
The other guy that falls in that mix is Brandon Smith. Get him to develop this year. He's got the body for it. The speed necessarily wasn't there off the bat, but a year with Doyle and the strength staff can make it where he's not the slowest guy necessarily on the field. And with that body size, you could use him red zone over the middle. There's a lot of ways to use him. And Lazard wasn't the quickest guy when he came to Iowa. He's great. He's got good speed, but nobody compared him to John Ross out of Washington, who set the record at the Combine in 40 last year. So they do have one of those guys already on campus. It's a question of if they can develop him and how much and how fast. And the other one is if they could ever pull him off the basketball team. It is that's just been sitting out there for years.
It would be to his best interest if he did that, but hey, it's his life and he'll lead it the way he wants to. See, anything on Drake Stoops? I wonder if this new wide receiver commit kind of ends the Drake Stoops flirtation.
It very well could. They were looking for one wide receiver and Nikko out of Connecticut, whose last name is Italian, and I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce.
And you're Italian.
Regani is how I think, but it could be totally off on that. Might very well take it, because the other interesting fact was he was really the only kid Iowa offered and really went after during December who didn't either commit to them or go elsewhere. So I've always wondered if he was waiting out for anything from Oklahoma, even if it was a walk-on spot, or if anyone in state would come after him. So you have that there. But, that's something that'll be interesting to see how that kind of plays out for a little bit with him, because I don't think they're going to add another one, because Nico's kind of the same wide receiver as Stoops anyway. They're not the tallest guy. They look like players who just make plays in space a little bit smaller. And while I was added several of those in the last two recruiting classes, I didn't think they needed to double up on it as we get into December. And then John wants to know how that Nikko kid looks, which ties up right into it. And that's pretty much what he is. He's a kid who can make some plays in space. He had to go to a prep school in Connecticut for a fifth year to try to get himself to this spot to get some Division I interest and offers, and it worked out for him. Ends up stealthily signing with Iowa. Nobody knew who this kid was until the national championship game, and he started to break there. But really, Iowa was his best option. The only other program that it looked like was after him in any major regard was Boston College, and they were talking gray shirts. So He looks kind of like the guy Iowa wants, with ability to make plays in space. They've kind of hoarded those guys the last few years. He's a little bit shorter, and so it'll be interesting to see what he can do, because he's enrolling early, and wide receiver is wide open like it was last year. If somebody makes a big push at wide receiver this year, they can push their way easily into the starting lineup in spring practice or in winter workouts, kind of do what Nick Easley did last year. So this is another good year for a kid at that position to be coming in early.
Yeah, you got two guys that are definites for next year, and Amir Smith-Marset and Nick Easley. The X receiver, to me, I think is naturally going to be Brandon Smith, but somebody else, Max Cooper, one of these guys that comes in, Tyrone Tracy when he comes in. Yeah. They usually like to go with about 5 and interchange a few guys. So I kind of see, okay, who's going to be in that 5 and break their way in. It very well could be this guy. He'll have a full spring to do it.
Yeah, and for anyone who wants my answer on who I think will be the wide receiver to be the instant impact, go read the recruiting mailbag. They published this afternoon, because I answered that question in there and kind of broke down all the receiving options from the viewpoint strictly of being able to play right away from the first year. Blake, with a very general question on your opinion on Fran McCaffrey. I'll let you handle that one, Mr.
Franny.
Basketball beat reporter for forever.
Forever, except yesterday. Oh, boy. Let me try to be a little more partial here, and that is, I'm going to cut this up. I'm going to say, look, Fran McCaffrey inherited the biggest disaster in Iowa basketball history. And a lot of people want to use Tom Davis as an example, and Tom was terrific. He also inherited the greatest collection of basketball players in Iowa history. So it's really apples, oranges when you compare this. It took him 2 years just to drive it out of the ditch. It was there. I was there, so it was there. He had 3 really good seasons. Did they achieve the level they should have? No, I don't think so. Last year, I thought they did. Getting to the NIT with that much youth and inexperience, I thought was a pretty good spot. They lost 394 starts. This year, they're not. This year, they are underachieving, and they're in a rough spot. My opinion on Fran, I wrote last week, is this is his 8th year. He deserves a bad year. He deserves the ability to have a bad year and come back from it. That said, I think there's been roster mismanagement. I think the fact that you're hurt at guard, 2 guards aren't there that they expected to be there. Christian Williams transferred, and Connor McCaffrey's been sick and are injured. So now they're stuck. But they have so many power forwards that it's really kind of paralyzed their offense. The difference between last year's offense and this year's offense is Peter Jock commanded attention from the other team every time he was on the floor because he could hit every shot. That enabled Iowa to space the floor better, to move the ball better in their motion. And this year, everybody's coming right after Jordan Bohannon, and their motion isn't moving very well. And then it's a hand and glove thing with defense, because Iowa's defense will never be great because they want to have as many possessions as possible and score as many points. However, when you're not getting good offense, you're making bad shots, which translates into transition opportunities for the other team on defense, which then, of course, turns into 80-plus points. Though right now that's on pace for the worst since, I think, 94 under Tom Davis, when they gave up 80-plus points a game. So I would say at this point, this is not a good year. This is not going to be a good year. They're not going to turn this around. But I think they have the ability, if they can get a couple of recruits, and they don't have any ability to do that right now. But if they do, if they find a way, I think they can make some changes and be very competitive next year. But this year, it's you got to write it off almost.
Yeah, for me, it kind of all starts here. This isn't 1985 where you can have a lot of guys in the front court and teams used to stock up guys there. It's become more of a guard back court where in a game you see teams playing 4 guards semi-regularly now. And same thing with 2 point guards. If you're going to overload somewhere, it's got to be a point. It's got to be in the backcourt with guards. And you can play a little bit different basketball now with the way teams go. Having all those big bodies is actually kind of a detriment. And it's put Iowa in the spot where their biggest need is an athletic guard. point guard, combo guard, defensive stopper, whatever, that is their biggest need. Point guard can be a separate conversation off of that we can have, but they need a guy who can kind of defend the perimeter a little bit and then be a secondary ball handler at a minimum, too, for them to make life easier for Bohannon. And because they're missing that, it's impacting them on both ends of the court. The fans notice the defense really easy because anybody can notice a guy attacking the basket and getting the layup. It stands out. The offense doesn't always stand out as much, but they don't always have great flow, great movement, and if teams want to take Bohannon away just by kind of focusing on him, making sure the ball gets out of his hands, they can do that. And that's a problem too, because that's your second most consistent offensive scorer. Your team should be designed, well, it's Iowa, they're designed to win with offense, and that is Tyler Cook and him, and Bohannon. And when teams can take away one of those guys because you don't have consistency from anybody else in the perimeter, it's a problem. What Isaiah Moss did in their last game with Maryland was a good step forward. Same thing with Nicholas Baer, what you saw from him, because he's not just a pure scorer, but he helps in so many ways that can help the offense get going too with the scoring. I agree with Scott. This team is what it is. But by the time you're at this point in January, it's kind of how you are. They're bad defensively, yes, and that's not going to change. But the one thing they probably can change is their offense, because that's the forte of virtually everybody on this team. And if they're going to win, to just pick up their first Big Ten win, to pick up a couple, it's probably going to come out of their offense playing a little bit better than it has. I know defense is the thing everybody wants to talk about, but I think short term, for this year in particular, if any games they win in the league, it's going to be because of their offense. Because their defense just kind of is what it is. That's a long-term issue. It's a different discussion. But the offense is going to carry them for whatever win total they get in the Big Ten play this year.
Because what you've seen is about an 8-point turnaround in Big Ten play from last year to this year, or especially this year with past years, except one. And that is they generally average in the 80-point range, and they generally give up in the 72, 73-point range, which is a healthy number for Iowa and based on the possessions. Because you look at Wisconsin, sure, they're giving up 59 points a game historically, but they're also playing a slower tempo type game that's much more efficient. So I think what Iowa has to do is just get more efficient on offense. The motion has to be better. Sometimes there's some really bad chemistry on the floor, and we can see that generally midway through the first half, after the first media timeout, and a lot of times there's substitutions in. There's just not enough chemistry, and sometimes you see guys in the wrong, two guys in the same spot. You're like, what are you doing? And then on defense, they're bad everywhere because they can't stop the ball. If they could stop the ball, it would enable the rest of the team to kind of feed off that defensively. What this team really needs in the worst way is an Anthony Clemens, who's here, for 4 years, started a lot of the season, certainly started his senior year, a guy who can play point, who can move the ball and defend the best guard on the other team.
Yeah.
If they had that player, it doesn't even have to be a superstar, could score 7-8 points a game, which is what Christian Williams kind of should have been.
Yeah.
Then they would have been okay. But, right now they just don't have that. So then they're trying to go with a 2-3 zone, and guys are still breaking through it. And then everybody collapses. Then they kick out to the perimeter, and boom, there's a 3-point shot. And then the post, their feet aren't moving enough. So there's a lot there that's not going to change this year at all.
The way teams can just dribble through that zone is baffling / also amazing, because I've never really seen it like that before. And it's kind of impressive that they're able to do it because it's designed to stop that. But that's part of the reason it's such a big problem. Paul wants to know who Kirk Ferentz's landscaper is. My guess is it's somebody who really, really loves it when you punt after you cross the 50-yard line.
Yeah, I would say it's punters and sons.
But yeah, that's in reference to the lawsuit that kind of came today going to trial, I think February 6th, with Ferentz and some of his neighbors over some long-standing issues with homeowner association stuff and gravel roads and landscaping and what basically I think would qualify as a nightmare scenario for anybody who owns a house or whatever consider owning a house. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. Mark has some questions here, and we always appreciate you chiming in, Mark, on our Facebook page. Need linebackers. Who are we after? Talk a little bit about the one that.
Yeah, Jaden McDonald's the guy we brought up before. Looks like a nice athlete who has good athlete who has good athleticism. I was trying not to say it, but that was really the best way to kind of describe him. Moves very well with the ball from his high school highlights, which you have to realize is the best plays the kid has. So it's going to, accentuate his strengths. He moves well with the ball, moves well in space. Potentially could be, I think, a Will or Leo linebacker. And if they want to go into more of a dime look. He might be able to pull that off from what it looks like on his high school tape. I'm a little hesitant there because linebacker to be able to play more as a safety or a defensive back is something, but it's something that I just couldn't immediately roll out off of this highlight tape. So that's the big guy that they're going after. Everything else that kind of got locked up with linebacker. So they'll add one more, and the question will be if Jane's going to be that guy or not.
Yeah. And I would say right now he's probably the leader in the, depending, especially because he's got a visit coming up in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think if you're Iowa, you're like where you're sitting there. I think he's got 3 visits set up. You're probably 3 favorites there. If you're Iowa, I think you got to like where you're sitting. They tend to close well in this kind of spot in January with kids like this.
Right. Matt, any hope for any JUCO point guard transfers for next year? I don't know of any specifically right now. They have to go get one. If it's not that, it has to be a grad transfer. You have to have somebody who could step in and play right away.
I think grad transfer is the answer, not necessarily JUCO. If you can get that spot opened up, and it's college basketball, kids transfer all the time, there probably will be something that happens with Iowa. Off of that, I would see if I could find a grad transfer because it's probably easier to find a grad transfer that can hit everything we've talked about, whether point guard, athleticism, stopper, combo guard that can pass. Those guys exist and are easier to find. All that'll either a lower level or a guy who's getting done playing at like a Rutgers or something like that, where maybe he wants to go to a team and go to win a few more games for another year. I think that's your best path because then you'll have that junior class of high schoolers right now. They have a shot at winning some point guards there, and it doesn't necessarily hurt you too bad on that front, where you could almost go from one to the other a little bit.
Right. James Hills brings up, a 10th grader from St. Paul, Minnesota, South St. Paul, Minnesota, Darian Foster, 6'4", 320, started as a freshman, plays both ways and moves like a linebacker. My guess is he's probably already on the 2020 list for Iowa and probably will come down for one of the barbecues this year.
I love the fact we're getting players just thrown into our question timeline here. With all that stuff, that is awesome. And you can definitely tell it's January.
Yeah.
And recruiting's on everybody's mind. That's awesome. I have to try to find some tape of that kid.
Yeah.
Because that's a big, beefy boy as a freshman.
That looks like you're going to have several teams trying to fight for him. Imagine the Badgers. He already sounds like a Badger in size.
Yeah, P.J. Fleck will be there if he's in state. We probably already knew who the kid was the first day he arrived.
Right, and Nebraska and Iowa will be there too. So I don't know if he'll play linebacker, but, man, he can play offensive line the way he looks. So.
Yeah.
Chad brings up, am I wrong for thinking Oklahoma State is a litmus test for Tom Brand's club? No, it's 100% right. They really haven't had – Illinois duel was pretty close, but now they've enlisted Spencer Lee and you got Alex Marinelli in the middle of the lineup. I think right now they will know whether or not they are a legitimate title contender. Second place contender. There's no such thing as a title contender this year. That's Penn State's. But they'll know if they're going to be in the upper 3 or 4, 5 spots at the national tournament based on how they compete with Oklahoma State. Really anxious to see what Spencer Lee does. He's got the number 6th ranked kid at 125. So if he can win that match, sky's the limit for him. Now, they've got some tough ones, and they're going to have to make sure the matches that they lose, they don't lose by more than 8 points. I mean, they got to make sure they don't lose by majors. And the ones where you got, the twosome there of Sorensen and Kemmerer, ranked number 2 in the country, they got to take care of business and probably get some extra points because that's what it could come down to, especially if they split 5-5. So, but I think we're all excited to see what Spencer Lee can do because, Brand said already there's more than 9,000 tickets sold and there's 5 days left, and I'm sure that's going to go up by about another 3,000 to 4,000.
That should be an interesting match, and for all the wrestling nuts, this is, they basically only care about the postseason, but this is one of those times where it'll get everybody going because you'll get to see where you're at well in advance of that, which will help the kids too as they kind of prepare for the back half of the season to lead into that. A couple questions on JUCO recruits and looking at punters. I'm assuming the JUCO question mark is in regards to Iowa football. I don't think there's anyone else JUCO wise they're going to go after unless something wild happens, maybe with linebacker there. I don't think they're looking at punters. It will be interesting to see if they sent out any offers recently, but maybe a grad transfer might be the only option. I don't think they're going to go with a high school punter in back-to-back classes, but if they want to address punting and they think they can't solve it for next year in-house, that's your option to go around Calusi 2.0.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm intrigued by Ryan Gersandi. Can he come back from his back injury? Because his numbers weren't that bad.
No.
42 average 42 yards a punt, but just never was healthy enough. But they have to do something better. And if that means, hey, did any of you defensive backs punt in high school?
Nate Stanley.
Yeah,
they don't want to use him there, but
they should have. I thought there was one point in the Pinstripe Bowl where they're backed up on their goal line, and I thought, why not have the best punter on the team kick it? And it's the quarterback. But, what are you going to do?
It happens, yeah. Mark, I don't think they're going to go after any more running backs, but who knows? Because they've got a couple scholarships at play. If they find one they like, they might end up with one. I mean, Brian was the same way. Ryan was the same way last year, late in the recruiting process. So I don't think so, but I wouldn't put it at 100% certainty.
And don't be shocked. I mean, Iowa's picking up some late grad transfers. When you have
that would make sense too. Yeah.
James Butler was a incredible pickup, and too bad for him. He wasn't healthier through the course of the season, but I mean, they picked up a wide receiver who didn't work out, but I could see, hey, and after May, somebody might pop up at a key position, like a linebacker possibly. That might be a little more tough to play, but certainly running back or punter.
Yeah, you could easily do. Eric wants to know what we think about Iowa's ability to compete for the Big Ten West Division title next year. I think Wisconsin's going to be a favorite. I think they're going to be an overwhelming favorite. Mm-hmm. And honestly, if anybody beats them out for it, I think it'll be a pretty substantial upset because you're getting a lot of those pieces back for them, and what they're losing in a lot of spots, Wisconsin can usually just replace it by being Wisconsin. So the schedule's not as good for them this year. I don't think you'll see the undefeated regular season talk, but I still think they're the class of the division, and Iowa's going to have to solve, wide receiver, the interior of the offensive line, and what they're doing at linebacker to really have a shot to join that conversation,
I think Iowa has the potential to beat them at Kinnick Stadium. I mean, it could be a night game probably in late September. You could see the same type of atmosphere that we've seen against Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan the last few years. Plus, it's a rival, and it's not, as much as the others are. So, but can Iowa sustain the whole season? I think Wisconsin can go 8-1. At worst, 7-2 in the Big Ten. Can Iowa do the same thing? Iowa may not be as talented or as deep. Wisconsin played incredibly well in the Orange Bowl. Hornibrook played easily his best game of the year. Their young wide receivers looked really good. So, and of course, Jonathan Taylor's really good. Yeah. And they've got a ton coming back on the offensive line. So, I mean, they've got enough pieces there to make you go, okay, they're obviously the favorite. Now, with Iowa, I look at them and probably Purdue. As the number, the main challengers. I'd put Northwestern there, but Clayton Thorson tearing his ACL.
That's a question mark. Yeah.
And I'm not going to put UCF up there either. I mean, this is kind of a tough transition year for the Golden Knights to the Big Ten. So the Golden Nebraska Knights.
Yeah, that plays into Mark's question about how good will Nebraska be. Will they be any good next year? If they're going to be any good at all, they got to find a way to solve that defense. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's a one-year fix. I think the defense is multiple years. They might be able to come in with that offense year one, put up good numbers, and look really good offensively, but I don't see how they solve the defense in 1 year. Mike, typically I think 2 years for a coach to come in is really kind of standard if they're going to turn it around. The first year, you almost throw it out in a lot of cases because they don't have all the guys they need for their system. Players are still learning them. They're learning the players. And by year two, you start seeing it come together. Mm-hmm. I think Nebraska, good again, that kind of whole sentence coming together, I think will be year two for Scott Frost. But who knows? It could happen year one. The guy was a heck of a coach at UCF.
No doubt about it. And he will be a heck of a coach at Nebraska. That said, this year they've got to go to Ohio State, Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Northwestern. Plus, you play Michigan State at home and Colorado at home. That's not easy. And then there's the other teams, a Purdue or So I right now I would say they're probably not going to a bowl game. Just based off that.
Ooh, hot take in Lincoln.
They lose their quarterback. Tanner Lee declared for the draft. Their best offensive lineman and Ben Gates. We saw that defense. That defense was about the same as Iowa basketball's defense. So, when you look at
that's a good comp.
So you look at those two and you're like, I don't know why they should be 8-4 because they're, gall dang it, Nebraska. I think they're 5-7 probably going into next year. But I think Scott Frost will have them very competitive in the near future.
Yeah, that's pretty good stuff there. Terrence wants to see, I'm assuming that's Josh Jackson, go to the Bears. I think Scott does too. Mm-hmm. And then a couple people asking again about Greg Stoops and kind of what's sitting there. Our guess is he's probably going to look elsewhere because the wide receiver Iowa just got the commitment from who's going to enroll early. Man, him and Drake Stoops are almost mirror images of each other. They're not the tallest guy. They both play well in space, and I don't see him bringing two of those guys in. But the final scholarships that they have left available, I don't think there's a need for them too, so they'll probably go elsewhere with it.
Yeah, I agree. Patrick brings up that Jackson's very likely a first-rounder. Jaden McDonald should be picking Iowa. I agree. Matt wants to know about Petrus if he's going to redshirt this year. You spent quite a bit of time with Spencer Petrus and his family.
I did, yeah. I want to say thanks to them again for letting me hang out with them for most of the day. The kind of thought process that he's going into with it is that he probably is going to redshirt. It's most likely how it'll play out. He's got to learn the offense still, even coming in early. They got Nate Stanley established. He's not going to be upset if that happens, but he's going to try to earn a spot to play right away. He'd love to start, as would any quarterback coming in, but he knows the Iowa situation, and he understands Peyton Manziel's coming off the red shirt. He already has a year in the offense, so he's coming, a step behind him. So betting odds, that would probably be the favorite. If you had a money line there, him redshirting would edge out over him playing right away, but I wouldn't rule it out. The kid's coming in early. His highlight tape is, crazy. He made substantial growth in his senior season. The kid seems to understand the playbook and pick things up pretty quick from what I've heard from talking with his high school coach a little bit. So there's a chance he's the backup quarterback, but I don't think Iowa's going to rush him in to play what would be mop-up snaps if he really is their number two.
Yeah.
In the games, and they have another guy right there. If Nate gets hurt for a substantial amount of time, and this is the scenario where they think Spencer is really their number two, that might change everything. But I would bet that he redshirts.
I think it's similar in some ways to what we saw with Nate Stanley a couple of years ago. He came in as a true freshman, and then beat out Tyler Wiegers for the number two spot, and that was mainly with an eye on 2017 because C.J. Beathard was leaving. That's not the case now. You have a 2-year window. If they like Peyton Manziel, then there's no reason to really do that now, whether Ryan Boyle stays or goes. The rumors are flying. Ryan Schmidt, they seem to like. He was the third quarterback. He's a walk-on from Linn-Mar. He's the third QB at Nebraska. So, they have options there. But that said, if Spencer Petrus comes in and it's like, wow, this guy's obviously number two. They might have a tough decision there because, what happens if somebody gets hurt? You want to win. So, but I would bet on the redshirting myself, just because the junior. Now, if Stanley was a senior, that'd be a different scenario.
Yeah. Patrick wants to know where the experts have Ross Pierschbacher going in the draft. Did you see anything on him? I haven't paid attention to anything beyond first round stuff.
I don't know that. If he entered the draft or not, I think this was his fourth year this year. My guess is he's probably top 3 rounds. He started at guard for multiple years at Alabama. I can't remember if he's a redshirt junior or a senior this year. But he's an NFL caliber player, and he's the one that got away that really hurt Iowa. That was tough for them to lose, kind of like basketball Tyler Ulis. He was that way because he's in state. They thought they had him. Then Bama came knocking. They still thought they kept him away, and he got away. So he's definitely a good player. Now, who gets drafted higher between him and James Daniels, we'll never know. Well, we'll know if they both are in the draft, but I think they're both probably in that second, third round range, probably. Yeah,
Michael wants to know, why does Iowa have such a tough time landing high-profile impact wide receivers? I think part of it's the way they recruit guys and what they look for. The guys Iowa like, the blue-collar, hard-working guys, the profile on wide receivers, for the most part, that's not a lot of guys who end up gravitating to play that position from personality test profiles, studies that have been done for decades upon decades in the NFL. It's not a position that lends itself to those kinds of players. There's a reason that Kirk Ferentz has his best success with offensive linemen, because those kinds of people with those traits tend to gravitate towards that position, regardless of their size. That's why I see smaller guys at high school kind of have success who have those traits there. And so that's part of it. I think part of it is some of those high-profile guys aren't going to like Iowa coming in saying, you have to come here and block before you can play. There's a lot of other programs, if you're a four-star wide receiver, that'll say, yeah, we'll line you up in our spread offense, get you in space and go. Mm-hmm. So that's Iowa being honest, which is good for them because the kids would have a reality check if they came in otherwise. But with the way the game's going, I don't think that necessarily helps them with some of those high-profile kids that you'd be talking about.
Yeah, and they've never really been able to grab those guys, and that's just what happens. I mean, Iowa's a run-based team. They try to be at least balanced, 50-50, if not tilt more towards the run, which, a lot of, guys, I mean, like Gavin Holmes, when he was committed to Iowa and then he ended up at Baylor, offense along with the decommitment phase from Texas kids really changed that. With Iowa, you look at, they feel like they can go anywhere and compete for offensive linemen. So if they go head-to-head even with Ohio State and Chicago, they feel like they have a good chance. Tight ends the same way. Wide receivers not so much. So sometimes they build them. Sometimes that's what they've done best in the past when you've got guys like Marvin McNutt, Daryl Johnson-Cleanos, Ed Kinkle, who are all quarterbacks, and then they move over and play wide receiver. That's been some of the best wide receivers in the last 20 years.
Yeah, we got a bunch of questions here on before we get that. Patrick, don't have too much for you on Shimon Cooper, the linebacker out of St. Louis from 2019, but as we get past signing day with 2018, there'll be some more stuff popping up with 2019 people, and I imagine I will visit a lot of 2019 prospects in this next month. But a lot of questions that seem to center on what happens with Iowa basketball with transfers. A couple people bringing up names like Kriener and Ellingson. I don't like diving too much into that, especially in the season with stuff like that. But I'll say what I said before is it's very common in basketball for teams to have roster turnover. It's become the norm where kids come for a year or two and leave, or teams have two, maybe even three players who just transfer out. And it's to the point where if you're over the number on guys that you have signed, more guys signed or committed than you have spots for, no one really frankly cares for the most part because they know it will eventually work its way out. I think that's the situation we're at with Iowa. We can talk about bringing a grad transfer in like that. I don't know who specifically it'll be, but it's probably going to work itself out that odds are someone transfers out just because that's the college basketball world we live in today.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the 2015 class, they had a shooting guard in Andrew Fleming who left after a year. They had another guy in Brandon Hutton who went JUCO after this, was not really ready for that. You had Trey Dickerson, who was a point guard who didn't want to be behind Clemens or Gazelle. I thought they were both better than he was personally, and he was much quicker than they were. Would have been a great addition. And then you also had Christian Williams who left, another guard. So they had some attrition, and that always happens with basketball. Now with those two specifically, I don't know. I don't know if that's the case. I would say this. I'll just tell you the situation. Brady Ellingson is a fourth-year guard. He'll be a graduate, and he's got the option to stay or go. I mean, if basketball is important to him, I'm sure that he would probably want to go somewhere and play. If not, then that's it. There's a lot of different scenarios, and I'd hate to be speculating about people without really knowing for sure. Especially when you talk about college athletes.
Yeah, and
I know he's been under the weather, so
yeah, I'm just constantly coughing for the last 2 weeks. I feel today's the first day I felt fine forever for my mom, if she's watching here to care.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm coughing, but don't worry, it's just lingering. That's what happens when you have a 2-year-old.
All right, yeah, we got it. Just a couple more we'll go through. We'll just cherry pick a few that we haven't really talked about. We've talked about Petrus. We've talked about guards, wide receivers in 19.
Wide receivers for 19. They'll sign a couple. I don't think they'll sign as many as you've seen the last couple of years where it's been really wide receiver heavy, but they'll add a couple in that class.
Yeah, exactly. Eugene brings up Iowa had some guys who changed their commitment. Who do we have to fill out the class for football?
There aren't a lot of guys that they're on at this point. The guys that ended up signing, and right now the number's probably around 3 is the max they'll have. And yeah, Eugene, you've got a later one coming. Those indie DBs will be coming. We covered that earlier, but just to sum it up shortly, yes, they will. we don't probably the guys who signed, they haven't offered yet, and they probably haven't visited either. And so the next on Thursday when the recruiting period picks up again will be a good hint on where Iowa wants to go with those final scholarships for football for 2018.
Yeah, and Patrick brings up, I read that a former player said he doesn't remember practicing defense once in practice. Any truth to that? That was, I think, Chad Leisticow wrote that a few days ago. I've seen him practice defense, so I don't know how – maybe they don't focus on it a whole lot. That's obvious. That's probably the case, that they focus more on offense. But so I don't know about once or whatever.
Yeah, in shoot-arounds, they don't do a lot of defense, so I don't really know the conversation that happened with Chad and the former player, but that is a spot where it doesn't happen, but that's common across the board. So they do practice defense. It just doesn't look like it's showing up right now.
Right. Let's see, Matthew need to recruit a new head basketball coach. Dr. Tom need way better and still got ran off. I think did way better is probably what he means. Like I said, here's the thing with Dr. Tom, who I have immense respect for and know personally. 13 years, 9 NCAA tournaments. They won every first-round game. The first 2 years, they advanced to the Sweet 16, one of which the Elite Eight. And then the last year, he went last to the Sweet 16. Everybody wanted him gone because he had the equivalent of an 8-4, 7-5 season, and then one game or 2 games, and then they're done. They really never advanced. That's why people wanted Dr. Tom gone. It has been a rough ride since then. I'll say it. I say it over and over and over again. Dr. Tom inherited the best collection of basketball players in Iowa sports history. Anybody that coaches basketball could have taken Roy Marble, B.J. Armstrong, Kevin Gamble, Brad Lowhouse, Les Jepson. I don't know, maybe he was a little later. Ed Horton. The list goes on and on. Bill Jones, and 10 different pros out of that. I think there were 6 different NBA draft picks that he inherited. What a gift from God. And they went to the Elite Eight, and they were a tremendous team, started 19-0. Fran inherited a team that went 10-22 the year before, and their best players were leaving except Matt Gaines. It was really hard for him to get going because you don't just, okay, you're new, and now you're going to go from 0 to 20. So after 2 years, I judge him. I take those 2 years off, and I judge him from then on, and I think he's been good, not great. And then but new coach, I think you give him 1 more year.
Okay. Quick fire on a couple of these. Howard, the wide receiver from Largo, Florida, Kelvin Lockett, signed. Mm-hmm. Yes, Iowa is recruiting the quarterback from Council Bluffs. They've been recruiting him heavily. I would argue, at least at that position, is their top priority for 2019. Eugene wants someone who will do more live recruiting interviews. When we go on the road to visit the kids next is when we do it, because Spencer came in early. We did one with him while I was out there because we had like a 2-week window from the end of the season. Expect more of those popping up in February on, maybe 1 or 2 in January here. But when we go visit the kids, we do them with virtually everybody unless the athlete declines to do them, which is kind of what happened on the last one I did.
Okay. And so David asked, you did not give enough time to wrestling. Why? We're going to give more time to wrestling. I wrote about it last week. We had stuff on Spencer Lee's match. We have posts every day that they wrestle. We will from now on. So we'll try to do more. Hopefully we'll turn your brown upside down.
Yeah. And so
I think
that's pretty much everything. So that pretty much sums this up. So, Scott, anything else?
I think we're good. Thanks so much for all your questions. There's quite a few here, and hopefully we answered some about as truthfully as we can, and we'll be excited.
Are we under oath here?
Huh?
What are we under oath here? As truthfully as we can?
Yeah, there's the Bible. This is on. Here it is, Bible. So, yeah. But anyway, thanks so much for chiming in. And we'll have more of these, I think another one next week.
Yeah, and be sure to go check out, I wrote a story on what Iowa should do with their 10th assistant and why that involves changing the position group Brian Ferentz coaches. Scott will have a piece up later tonight on the offensive line and the changes there. And I do have to go now because my phone is blowing up with Twitter mentions with people coming at me with lost comments. So that's my sign that this has to end. So I'll see you later, people. Bye.
Bye.